A few things came up this week. A few questions were brought up recently, and then also a few fragrances that I have spoken about in a few videos this week came to the result of this video of doing the most manliest fragrances from designers that were launched from 2000 and on. So I thought, let's put together a video of the most masculine or manliest fragrances that I have in my collection that are targeted specifically to men, and they're also from the designers. Most of these are designers, in fact all of them should be. And I think they're pretty much masculine, like ultra masculine, manly fragrances. So if you want to find out what these fragrances are and what I think about them, then please stay tuned. Thanks so much for tuning in. This is Sebastian with Smelling Great Fragrance Reviews. You know, when I was first starting to smell fragrances, I wasn't even in my teens. My parents wore fragrances, and the fragrances of the 70s and 80s were so different than the fragrances of now. They were extremely different, especially all fragrances, even the ones that are targeted to women, they were completely different to what they are now. And then men's fragrances were even more masculine than the fragrances I'm going to speak to you about. If I included the 90s and 80s and 70s, or you know, older than those eras, the fragrances would be so much more masculine. But I wanted to kind of keep it in a way that it's a little more modern list rather than you know, older fragrances. Perhaps in the future I'll do a more a list of including, you know, fragrances from all eras, but today we're focusing on just fragrances from the 2000s into what's current. But either way, I'm going to let you know about the fragrances and a little info about the notes that go into making the fragrances masculine. But before I get to the information, if this is your first time tuning into my channel and you still haven't subscribed, please click the subscribe button below and also click the bell so you'll be notified for future videos and giveaways. As I said, the fragrances in the 70s and 80s, or even earlier, the ones I was used to from my parents, especially from my dad and uncles, were a lot more masculine than the fragrances here. These fragrances would not compare to the fragrances back then, but some of them are. You know, some of the fragrances that I'm speaking about today are definitely on the masculine side and very, very manly. They're targeted to men, they're from the designers, and you know, they're not fragrances that are overly expensive or luxury. These are from signature lineups of fragrances, so you can probably get these fairly inexpensively at discounters, or you know, suggested retail prices should be under $100 because there is a Tom Ford on the list as well. Tom Ford's fragrances tend to be expensive, but the rest of the fragrances are, you know, around the $100 mark if you're doing suggested retail. But either way, I decided to only include 2000s, 2010s, and then now. And then the fragrances that are masculine, what do I think of masculine notes? I think Vetiver is definitely a masculine note for me. Woods or woody notes, very, very masculine. Leather is a very masculine note. Black pepper, pink pepper, spicy notes like that can be, you know, masculine. Cypress, masculine woodsy note. Cumin and or other spices can be very masculine. Aromatics or aromatic notes such as lavender, geranium, those can be very, very masculine. Fir, pine, very, very masculine woodsy notes. Juniper or juniper berries, violet leaves, patchouli, animalic notes, and more. So those are the notes I find to be very, very masculine in fragrances. And one thing I should say, these are the manlier of the masculine fragrances. At least for me they are. A lot of them do not feature hardly any floral notes because, you know, guys that are used to wearing just masculine fragrances probably might be turned off with you know, flowers and things like that. I have no problem with those styles of you know, fragrances or notes because my palette is really, really wide. I started, you know, this journey with only appreciating more masculine notes, but as you you know, go through the journey, you'll start appreciating different notes. At one time I didn't like rose, at one time I didn't like vanilla, but I'm obsessed with those notes now. Anyway, let's get started with the fragrances. The first one I'm going to talk to you about today is Narciso Rodriguez for him. So here we have a great fragrance created by Francis Kurkdjian for Narciso Rodriguez, and it features the notes of violet leaves, musk, patchouli, and amber. So it is kind of like a fougere style of fragrance, but not using traditional fougere notes. It features the violet leaves, of course. It's a very, very unique fragrance. You can smell the violets, but then it's like more ozonic rather than the actual flowers, because you have the combination of the leaves in here, but you still also pick up a little bit of the violety touch. For me, the violet leaves is definitely watery, ozonic, earthy, kind of slightly petrichor-y, you know, all those things come to mind, but there's traces of the flower in there as well. It's musky, and you know, the patchouli really works with this one as well, but I find it to be ultra masculine and very, very manly fragrance. Definitely the opposite of Narciso Rodriguez for her, which I don't even remember what it smells like now. But this one, it's a solid release, really, really wonderful release from Narciso Rodriguez, probably one of the better fragrances created by Francis Kurkdjian. So that's for him. Now this next one is a fragrance from a house called John VARVATOS, and this is Dark Rebel Rider. I featured this one and not the previous Dark Rebel in it because this one is even more masculine for me. It's very, very masculine with a very leather experience with ambery touches. Now when I read you the notes, there's going to be kind of gourmand type notes. And for me, when it goes sweet, for me, it means it becomes less and less masculine, you know, it becomes more unisex. But for me, the leather is so pungent and strong in here, I find it to be a very butch, a very manly or masculine experience. This one's chock full of leather with some cacao, there's woodsy notes, vanilla, there's some cedar, patchouli, olibanum, and resins. You know, it's animalic even. It has a very animalic smell, and there's a kind of a chalky, gummy quality about it as well, but very, very kind of like rough and rugged kind of leather fragrance created by, you know, I forgot his name. I think it's Rodrigo Flores Rue the Perfumer, and it's for John VARVATOS. Now, one thing I forgot to mention about this list, I had to make sure every single one of the fragrances is still selling that you can find, and I did find this one for discounts around $40 for a bottle, and I don't know if it's still, you know, it exists or it's selling. Like it's a not a discontinued fragrance. It could be discontinued, but still you can find this fragrance. So I recommend it as a very manly fragrance, Dark Rebel Rider from John VARVATOS. I rarely speak about this particular fragrance, but it's probably one of the first fragrances that really got me into the idea of reviewing fragrances, but it's kind of one that I got so tired of because I wore so much of it. So I rarely have spoken about it on this particular channel, but I used to speak about it on the old channel. This is a Vetiver focused fragrance created by Jean-Claude Elena for Hermes. This is Terre de Hermes, this one right here. I do want to do a video comparing the different flankers of this particular series, but this one I find it to be a very masculine fragrance, definitely on the masculine side with the focus of Vetiver. Vetiver I find to be very, very masculine, but it does have a little bit of a softness to it because of the orange note in here. There's a huge amount of orange in here, which sweetens up the fragrance a little bit, but still it's a very, very earthy, slightly metallic and aromatic experience. There's so Vetiver, orange, cedar, patchouli, black pepper spices things up a little bit. Geranium comes in to give it a little bit of a more of an aromatic and slightly minty touch. But I think it's a great release. As I said, I wore so much of it. And the way I found out about this one, before it was even launched, it was launching in 2006 when it first came out. I read a little article in some magazine from my credit card, and it spoke about Jean-Claude Elena at the time, who created this supposed masterpiece. And after that fragrance, I rushed out to buy it from Nordstrom, and the rest is history, you know. But I think it's definitely a solid masculine release. It's manly, and it's definitely on the classy side as well. So this is a Terre de Hermes, and it's the Eau de Toilette version I'm speaking about. The next fragrance I'm going to speak to you about is Encre Noire à la Extrême. Either of the flankers is pretty masculine or manly for me, but the citrus not as much the sport. This one definitely is. It's a deeper, richer version of the original. And for me, the original Encre Noire focuses on vetiver with Cypress. But here, I feel like it's a lot more depth. There's a lot more depth to it, you know? when you look at a photo and you could see the depth of field in it, you can really experience in this one. Whereas for me, Encre Noir as a fragrance by itself, the original, feels a little one-dimensional, but this one you can see its deep richness. That's why I prefer this one over it. But I find it to be very, very masculine. There's hardly any sweet notes in here. It's all about the Cypress vetiver, the LME resin, which is kind of slightly dark and smoky, resinous touch. Incense comes in, adds more smokiness to it. Sandalwood, patchouli, benzoin, and NOIRE. So I think the only sweetness that we're getting in here is from that benzoin note, but I think it rounds off the fragrance perfectly and makes for a great wearing experience. Very, very classy, but very manly experience with the vetiver. So this is Encre Noir à la Extrême, and you can get that for fairly inexpensively currently. If you like getting deals on fragrances, I highly recommend that particular series. Now this next one is a flanker, and I decided to include flankers of fragrances that had launched before the 2000s, because obviously they're currently released and they're kind of fragrances that are, you know, new takes on original or previous fragrances. This is Cartier's PASHA de Cartier Parfum. Now this might be I guess it's sweetened up with the boozy touches because there's a boozy note in here, but it kind of hints at the original, which is an ultra masculine fragrance. The original Cartier PASHA de Cartier is so intensely barbershoppy and classic smelling that I feel like it's over the top masculine. Here it's still masculine because you have the hints of that particular fragrance, but in the end I feel like it's modernized for today's generation or noses or audience and things like that. So the booziness for me softens it up a little bit. That boozy touch in here, the liqueur touch, which, you know, it's still a very manly fragrance for me, and I find it to be a solid release, but features sandalwood, balsam fir. This is one of the notes I find to be very masculine, the balsam fir note. There's some liqueur note, as I said, tonka beans, benzoin, ambroxanide, which is ambroxan, patchouli, labdanum. It's considered an oriental fougere, so it's fougere barbershop style with the oriental touches of, you know, benzoin, labdanum, things like that. So that's PASHA de Cartier, a very, very classy masculine release from the house of Cartier. Cartier is doing some great things lately, and I have a video focusing on 4 fragrances from Cartier, the PASHA series, that I recently launched. If you haven't caught that, please do. So this next fragrance is from the house of LALIQUE once again. This is Hommage à la Homme. So here we are focusing on violet leaves. Violet leaves have a very ozonic, watery quality. It also focuses on oud with the flower as well. The flowers and the violet leaves themselves, the violets versus the violet leaves, they smell a little different. With the violet leaves alone, you do pick up traces of the violet as a flower, but for me it's more ozonic and earthy kind of an experience. But here it's a masculine and manly fragrance because it has the combination of the violet leaves, the oud, with black pepper, musk, tonka beans, saffron, and labdanum. So it's a spicy experience, but it's also a very ozonic and watery experience, but still very you know, masculine and manly. But you know, it hints at things like green Irish tweed a little bit, and maybe a little bit of Jeffrey Bean. Oh God, what's the name of the fragrance? I'm drawing a blank with the green bottle. Kind of hints at those kind of fragrances because it features this violet leaf note, but still a very, very masculine fragrance. But if I was going to rank this list of least masculine to most masculine, this one is not ultra masculine, it's not ultra over the top masculine, but still a very, very manly wearing experience for me, and definitely not feminine whatsoever. So this one is a great release from this house, Hommage à la Homme from LALIQUE. In fact, LALIQUE is a great house for some undiscovered gems. If you don't know about this house, go check out my top 10 video of LALIQUE's men's fragrances if you're curious to discover this particular fragrance and 9 other fragrances from the series. So that is Hommage à la Homme from LALIQUE. Now this is one of the fragrances that kind of gave me the idea to do this video, even after receiving several comments and messages and emails about doing a video on my most masculine or manly fragrances. This is Gucci Guilty Absolute Pour Homme. I recently did a video about this, and even though it's still selling at the discounters, I didn't don't see this particular fragrance on Gucci.com, so I don't know the status of this. Is it going to get discontinued or not? But a few of you guys said it's still selling on our websites, things like that. So maybe it's only a USA thing. But either way, this is a very, very uber masculine fragrance that was launched in the late 2010s. Leather, cypress, patchouli, vetiver, woods. So it's very, very manly. It's a very manly smell. It's very, very rough and rugged. The leather really intensifies. It makes it very animalic and manly, you know, very, very butch experience. But, you know, fragrances were sort of like this back in the day, you know, they were kind of intense like this, very, very rough. And perhaps this is the reason why this didn't do very well or didn't linger or is still not lingering on. I'm not 100% sure. It's a great flanker though of the original series, which I was never a fan of, and this kind of changed my mind. And of course I have my 4 favorites in this series. Go catch my video when I was speaking about this one and 3 other fragrances. Either way though, that's Guilty Absolute Pour Homme from the house of Gucci. This next one is from the house of Tom Ford. It's Beau de Jour. So I included this one because I find it to be very manly and masculine, even though it's lavender, because it's a barbershoppy fougere fragrance. I was going to feature Noir, Tom Ford Noir. I felt that that was a little more unisex leaning than this particular one, because for me, from my experience and what I hear from women don't tend to like this particular kind of a smell, the barbershop fougere style of fragrance. They prefer fragrances like Noir, which kind of goes musky, but things like this they don't. So I left off Noir, even though I think it's quite phenomenal, but this one definitely is manly. For me, this is chock full of loads of lavender, 3 kinds of lavender, maybe 2 kinds, I can't remember now. Patchouli, rosemary, oak moss, mint, basil, amber, and geranium. So as I mentioned earlier in the video, aromatic notes of herbs are very, very masculine to me, especially some of the ones they're using here. Rosemary, oak moss. I mean, oak moss is generally a base note, but rosemary, basil, mint, and geranium as well. Those aromatic notes are ultra masculine, and they tend to go masculine and sharp and herbal. And this one's definitely a quality release from the designers. This might be the most expensive on the list, but you can probably find them at discounters. I recently saw it at Saks off Fifth for about $100 for a bottle of 100 ml, but I think it was around $110. So there's deals out there at the discounter, so look for it if you like the idea of this particular fragrance, and it's a great solid release from Tom Ford. So that is Beau de Jour from Tom Ford, focusing on lavenders and fougere barbershop fragrances. Now this next one is a fragrance from the house of Bottega Veneta, and it's Pour Homme. So Bottega Veneta Pour Homme is a leather fragrance, but it's not as intense as the leather in this particular fragrance, and of course the leather in the Gucci Pour Homme Absolute, or Absolute Pour Homme. This one seems a little thinner, but still it's leather with lots of pine note. Pine is definitely a masculine note. Fir is definitely a masculine note, which is also in here. Juniper, patchouli, and labdanum. So it does have a little bit of an ambery base with patchouli, but it's lots of leather, And I think the leather is inspired by the fact that this designer is known for their leather goods. The design of their leather goods is on here, as you can see. That's the bottom of the bottle. That's why they have this right there. But either way, this one is a very really classy and masculine, manly offering. It does hint at a little bit of Russian leather from Memo Paris, but this is its own unique creation, but a wonderful creation. Again, it's a leather, but it doesn't feel heavy and dense and weighty. Kind of, it's got some lightness to it. Anyway, Bottega Veneta Pour Homme, a great solid manly fragrance from the house of Bottega Veneta. So I wanted to include the Dior Homme series of fragrances. I wanted to include Valentino Uomo. There's a reason why I left off Valentino Uomo, because they've changed it, they've discontinued it. And then the fact that they have Dior Homme Intense, and they still have a new version of Dior Homme Parfum. I still didn't include this series because I find that to be very unisex and not manly. But the latest version of Dior Homme 2020 I felt like was manly enough to be featured in this video, because in the end it's a very woody experience. Woody spicy, I would call this. This is featuring loads of ISOE Super, so it smells like cedar sandalwood combo. It's a synthetic molecule with vetiver. There's cashmere wood, there's pink pepper, there's elemi resin, cedar, patchouli, and musk. So it's a classy fragrance. I prefer the original Dior Homme, but I also prefer more Dior Homme Intense and Dior Homme Parfum. But if you're looking for a classy, masculine, manly, kind of a you know, woody fragrance, a woody spicy, then Dior Homme 2020 would satisfy. I think I mentioned this at the beginning of the video. This doesn't compare to anything that was launched in the 80s or 70s as far as masculine fragrances go. But this, in comparison to today's fragrances that are, you know, mass marketed with sweet, ambery kind of aquatic touches, I find that to be, this is definitely leagues above it, and definitely more masculine leaning compared to the sweet kind of amber wood aquatic kind of fragrances that are very, very popular out there. So Dior Homme 2020, definitely classy and masculine. Check it out if you don't know it. So the next one I'm talking about is Declaration Parfum from Cartier, and once again, the original version of this fragrance came out in the late 90s, just like the PASHA came out in the early 90s. So the Parfum came out 2 or 3 years ago, and it's a great, very, very classy, very manly fragrance, focusing on lots of cardamom, bitter orange caraway, which is kind of like cumin, black pepper, birchwood, coriander, ginger, vetiver. Again, no flowers here. None of the fragrances that I featured flowers. Might have it as a background note. A couple of them have the violet flower compared to the, in addition to the violet leaf. So, but none of the fragrances here featured flowers. So flowers, for me, definitely do lean feminine. I have no problem with them. I wear them, but these fragrances I felt are very manly for what we have been served from the designers from the last 20 plus years, you know, starting from 2000 on. But this Parfum version is so sexy. It's very, very classy and sexy, and I highly recommend it for a great, great release. Now there's going to be another fragrance I'm going to talk about that's coming up in a little bit that might remind me of it, but if you liked the original Declaration, you definitely should check this one out. Highly recommended for a very, very sexy but very, very classy, manly experience of wearing experience. So that's Cartier Declaration Parfum. Now this is the second fragrance that got me the idea to do this video, because it's ultra masculine and I featured it in a video recently. This is from the house of Bentley and for Men Absolute. A very, very masculine fragrance for me. It's a designer release, and it's reminding people of Gucci Pour Homme, which was also a masculine experience for a manly or a men's targeted release. But for me, this one is chock full of cedar with pink pepper, olibanum, papyrus, oud, sandalwood, amber, and ginger. It's very woody, it's very spicy, but also oudy and smoky, you know? So in the end, very, very manly experience. No flowers, no sweet notes, no vanilla, things like that. Just all spices, woods, and, you know, smoky touches. Either way, for Men Absolute from the house of Bentley is a very, very manly experience. If you don't know it, do check it out. I do recommend that one as a great alternative to Gucci Pour Homme, the discontinued Gucci Pour Homme. So in putting my notes together for this particular video, I went through my entire collection and I came up with a list of fragrances, and I was kind of like eliminating some and things like that. This one I almost cut off, but I think it's fairly masculine, even though it might have a little bit of a, I don't think it's gourmand. Either way, this is Caron's AIMEZ-MOI Comme Je Suis. So this is a vetiver focused fragrance with hazelnuts, and then it features tobacco, tonka beans, ginger, grapefruit. It's classy, it's masculine, it's not uber manly, but still featuring a vetiver and grapefruit and hazelnuts together with the ginger, tonka, and tobacco. I think it's a very, very solid offering from this house. Definitely masculine leaning, not feminine whatsoever. We don't have flowers here, we don't have sweet notes and things like that. Hazelnuts are toss up between being a gourmand or something like that, but in the end, very, very quality release from Caron. Check it out if you don't know it. I really, really recommend it. And for me, anytime I see vetiver in a fragrance, it definitely goes masculine and manly for me. So this next one is a fragrance from a house called Kiton, and this is Kiton Black. So this one, once again, features violet leaves, violet, leather, vetiver, amber, cyclamen, cedar, cardamom, red berries. So when you start recognizing the smell of violet leaves, some fragrances will remind you of one another, especially if the violet leaves note is a, what do you call it? Very standout, like it's the dominant note in the fragrance. For me, a little bit similarities to this one. A little bit, not a lot, because they both feature that violet leaf note. And even though this one is also violet leaves, they don't have similarities. At least I'm not picking them up because they go in different directions. But for me, this is very, very ozonic with the violet leaves, slightly powdery with the violets. Not a lot. The violets do add some powdery touches, but they're not ultra powdery. But here's what's giving it more masculine touches. It's the leather and the vetiver. And then there's the cyclamen flower in here. And I think it's a very, very classy and masculine offering. For me, it's not an uber dense experience because the violet leaves has this ozonic quality, slightly watery. There's some lightness to it. So if you're looking for that deep, rich, rugged, rough masculine offering, this is not it. But as a wearing experience, I find it to be very, very manly. So that's Keaton's Black. If you don't know it, do check it out. I quite like that one a lot. And then I'm going to end the video with this particular offering that does remind me of the Cartier I just spoke about. This is 1920 The Origin with cedar, cumin, tea, patchouli, cardamom, bergamot, and jasmine. Here we do have a little bit of a jasmine note, but for me it kind of reminds me of one another. So this one is ultra spicy, and it's also very woody, you know. The woods is very, very prominent, but the cumin is definitely there. And it's funny that they say cumin in here, caraway in here, and for me caraway seems to be lighter than cumin. I don't get like an overdose of cumin with this one, but it's definitely prominent. If you don't like cumin, you're probably going to hate this one. And I find cumin to be a very masculine offering as a note in fragrances. It tends to go masculine. It can go funky to people. People compare it to body odor and things like that. But with the cumin balanced out with the tea in here, it's a wonderful offering, you know. The cardamom is also very prominent, and the cardamom comes in here as well. So in the end, these two really do remind me of one another. Either way though, they're both very, very masculine and manly offerings for fragrances. If you don't know the 1920 The Origin, you should definitely check it out. It's from a house called Taos from Spain. It's a jewelry house, and I think this particular release is definitely manly, masculine, and a quality offering for guys who want to smell, you know, masculine. Anyway, those are my 15 favorite masculine fragrances from the 2000s on to today. Of course, these are the fragrances I have in my collection. I don't have every single fragrance out there, so if you were expecting to see one, unfortunately, if I didn't have it, I didn't feature it. But there's also the other thing where I might not find it to be an ultra masculine fragrance, so I might have left it off if I did have it. You know how that makes sense? You know if that makes sense? Anyway, let me know if you like these fragrances. Let me know if you find them masculine. Let me know what your favorite masculine fragrances or very manly fragrances are. Put some comments down so I can find out. Either way, guys, thanks so much for watching today's video. If you have any questions or comments, please do list below. Otherwise, please like this video, please share it, follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and I'll be back with more videos very soon. Have a good one. Goodbye.